Daniel and Claire were siblings who shared more than just a family bond, and when their forbidden affair spiraled out of control, it ended in a murder so shocking that an entire community was left haunted forever. In a neighborhood where life moved at an ordinary pace and families seemed almost interchangeable, two siblings grew up under one roof with the same rules, the same memories, and the same parents guiding them through childhood. From the outside, they looked like the picture of family stability. Their house was modest but well kept, their parents strict yet caring, and their lives carefully structured around school, church, and weekend gatherings. The brother, a few years older, always had the air of someone who took responsibility seriously. He was the one who made sure his sister got home from school safely, the one who defended her against bullies, the one who made her laugh when the pressures of adolescence began to creep in. To neighbors, he was the protective sibling, someone destined for good things. To his parents, he was a son who carried their pride on his shoulders. His sister, on the other hand, was seen as intelligent, quiet, and well-behaved. She moved through life with a kind of grace that people admired, often praised for her diligence in school and her ability to stay out of trouble. Together they were thought of as unusually close, the kind of siblings who never seemed to fight, who shared everything without jealousy or rivalry. Behind closed doors, though, their closeness began to take on a weight that others could not see. In the early years, it was innocent and unshakable bond formed through shared secrets, whispered jokes in the dark, and nights spent confiding in each other about fears they dared not tell anyone else. When storms rolled in and the thunder rattled the windows, they sat together in silence, finding comfort not in words but in the simple knowledge that they were not alone. As the years passed, that comfort grew into dependency. They were each other's anchor in a household that, despite its outward appearance, was often cold and unyielding. Their parents loved them, but their love was marked by rules, expectations, and little room for mistakes. In that environment, the brother and sister learned to lean more on each other than on anyone else. Adolescence complicated everything. The brother grew taller, stronger, more independent, and girls began to notice him. The sister blossomed in her own way, attracting attention from boys at school. Yet instead of pulling them apart into separate social lives, it seemed to push them closer together. They shared stories of who liked who, what was said in hallways, and how confusing emotions could be. Late at night, when the world was quiet, they whispered about the struggles of growing up, about what it felt like to be misunderstood. The connection that once seemed natural now carried an undertone neither of them spoke aloud, but both began to sense. What started as long talk slowly shifted into something more charged. A touch lingered a little too long, a glance carried something unspoken. At first, both dismissed it as imagination, but the feeling returned stronger each time. The secrecy of it only added to the intensity. They both knew this was something forbidden, something that could never be revealed, but they could not deny the magnetic pull drawing them together. In the privacy of their shared world, boundaries blurred. They told themselves it was only closeness, that no one else would understand, but deep down they knew it was becoming something dangerous. By the time the brother reached early adulthood, he was admired by the neighborhood for his charm and discipline. He held a job, dressed sharply, and carried himself with confidence. The sister, entering her late teens, was known for her intelligence and beauty. Teachers praised her, relatives admired her, and friends sought her advice. Outwardly, they appeared to be a pair of siblings anyone would envy. But behind the curtain of normalcy, their secret bond had already crossed into a realm neither of them could escape. What began as small moments of intimacy had spiraled into a full affair, carefully hidden in the spaces where no one could see. They became experts at concealment. Every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every birthday party was an exercise in performance. They smiled, they laughed, they played their roles with flawless precision. Yet under the table, their legs brushed, their eyes lingered a second too long, and their bodies carried an energy that only they could feel. The guilt pressed down like an invisible weight, but it was never heavy enough to break them apart. Instead, it seemed to tie them closer, as though the very wrongness of what they were doing created a bond stronger than ordinary love. In public, they went to great lengths to appear ordinary. The brother dated casually, careful never to let anything become serious. The sister entertained suitors but dismissed them before anything could develop. Friends wondered why they both seemed uninterested in relationships, but no one suspected the truth. Behind their polite excuses lay the reality that no one else could satisfy what they had found in each other. The secrecy itself became intoxicating, a fire that burned hotter with every risk they took. Their private world became the place they retreated to when life outside grew too heavy. The brother, frustrated by work and responsibilities, found release in her presence. The sister, burdened by academic pressure and the expectations of their parents, leaned on him for comfort. Together, they created a bubble of intimacy that shielded them from the outside world. Yet beneath the comfort was a growing shadow. They both knew that if anyone ever discovered their secret, it would destroy everything. Their family would collapse, their reputations would be ruined, and the lives they had built would turn to ash. That knowledge haunted them, but it also fueled their determination to keep everything hidden. The secrecy, however, began to take its toll. Both lived with the constant fear of exposure, always aware that one wrong word, one careless slip, could unravel everything. The brother became hyper-aware of neighbors' glances, friends' questions, even the casual remarks of relatives. The sister grew quiet in social settings, terrified that something in her expression might betray her. They moved through life like actors on a stage, hiding their true selves behind masks of normalcy. Yet when the masks came off, when the door was closed and the world was shut out, the intensity of their connection only deepened. This was not the story of two siblings drifting apart with age, but of two people pulled into a spiral they could no longer control. They told themselves it was love, that it was fate, that no one could understand what they shared. But in the quiet moments when guilt pressed too hard, they also knew it was a ticking time bomb. A secret like theirs could never remain hidden forever. It was only a matter of time before the walls they had built began to crack, before someone saw what they were trying so desperately to hide before. Their forbidden bond demanded a price far higher than they were prepared to pay. The siblings carried their secret into adulthood as though it were a precious jewel and a poisonous burden at the same time. To anyone watching from the outside, they appeared to be perfectly ordinary, perhaps even enviable. They had steady lives, respectable jobs, and a family that believed in their goodness. Their bond was praised as something rare and admirable, a closeness that people said others should learn from. But in truth, that bond had crossed lines that no one would ever imagine, and it was in those shadows where their real lives unfolded. The brother lived with a careful rhythm. He worked diligently, carried himself with confidence, and seemed like the kind of man who had control over everything. His co-workers admired his discipline, and his parents were proud of the stability he projected. He went on dates now and then, choosing partners carefully, never letting any relationship grow serious. It was not because he could not commit, but because he already had a commitment that no one else knew about. Each date was a performance, an attempt to convince others and himself that he was normal, but he always returned to the same place, to the one person who shared his secret and his life. The sister created her own illusion. She appeared focused on her studies, ambitious and dedicated, someone who carried herself with quiet strength. Friends noticed that she was admired by many, but she never seemed truly interested in anyone. They assumed she was simply cautious or waiting for the right person. Behind that image, she was deeply entangled in a relationship that no one could ever suspect. She was not waiting for the right person because, in her mind, she had already found him, even though he was someone she should never have been with. Together they lived what could only be called a double life. By day, they blended into the normal rhythms of the world. They attended family dinners, smiled at neighbors, worked, studied, and acted as though nothing was unusual. By night, or in stolen hours when no one was watching, they retreated into their own private universe. It was a world of closed curtains, hushed conversations, and quiet intensity. It was not just passion, but also an escape from the rules and expectations that had been forced on them since childhood. In their hidden world, they could be free, but that freedom was built on lies. As time went on, the lies grew thicker. They had to invent reasons for being together so often, excuses that explained why they were always in each other's company. A late-night visit was explained as needing advice, a weekend away was disguised as errands or studying. They learned to weave false stories without hesitation, rehearsing them in silence so they could be convincing when questioned. Every cover-up added another layer to their deception, and with each layer the stakes grew higher. The brother began to feel the pressure more heavily. He became suspicious of even casual glances from coworkers or family members, interpreting small comments as possible hints of suspicion. He noticed how his sister avoided talking about relationships with friends, and how she grew nervous when people teased her about dating. The constant fear of discovery wrapped around him like chains. The sister carried her own burden of anxiety, living in dread that someone might see through her composure. Her friends often asked why she never brought anyone home, why she seemed so distant when conversations turned toward love. She brushed off the questions, but the weight of lying began to press down harder with each passing month. What made the situation more dangerous was how intoxicating the secrecy became. They both knew that what they were doing was wrong, yet the forbidden nature of their bond made it even more irresistible. Each time they escaped detection, the thrill deepened. They began to believe they were untouchable, that their careful planning and flawless performance would keep them safe forever. The risk became part of the attraction, and the fear of being caught only fueled their need to cling tighter to each other. At family gatherings, they played their roles with expert precision. They joked like siblings should, smiled at relatives, and blended seamlessly into the laughter around the table. No one suspected that beneath those smiles lay a secret that could shatter the entire family. Every embrace, every glance, every word had to be carefully controlled. The smallest slip could expose them. They walked through life like actors in a play, rehearsing every move, perfecting every scene, yet always aware that one mistake could end everything. As years passed, the tension between living two lives began to take its toll. The brother sometimes wondered if it was worth it, if carrying the weight of secrecy was sustainable. But when he looked at his sister, when he saw how much she depended on him, he knew he could never walk away. The sister, too, questioned their choices in moments of solitude. She knew it could not last forever, that eventually the truth would demand to be known. Yet the thought of losing him was unbearable. They were trapped by their own desires, chained together by something they both longed for and feared. The double life grew more complicated when friends and family began to ask harder questions. Why wasn't the brother settling down? Why didn't the sister have a serious boyfriend? Why were they always together, even as adults with their own lives? The more people asked, the more lies they had to invent. Each excuse became more elaborate, each story more fragile. They began to sense the walls closing in, but neither had the strength to stop. Instead, they clung to each other even more tightly, convinced that their love, however forbidden, was worth the risk. There were moments when reality cut through the illusion. A slip of the tongue, a glance that lasted too long, a friend's raised eyebrow. Small cracks appeared in their carefully constructed facade, and panic would surge through them. Each time they worked quickly to patch the damage, but the fear lingered. They both knew that it was only a matter of time before someone noticed something they could not explain away. The double life they had built was like a house of cards, beautiful from the outside, but fragile enough to collapse at the slightest touch. Still, they pressed on, addicted to the secrecy, bound by the intensity of their connection. They told themselves they could manage it, that they could keep everything hidden if they were careful enough. But deep down, they both knew the truth. Secrets like theirs did not stay buried forever. Every day they lived with the gnawing awareness that discovery was inevitable, that their carefully balanced world would one day crash down around them. What they did not yet realize was how close that day had already come, and how violently their story would unravel once the first thread was pulled. The first signs of danger came quietly, in ways that seemed small at first. A close friend of the sister began noticing things that did not add up. At a party, she saw the way the brother's eyes lingered too long, a look that seemed out of place. Another time, she overheard a fragment of a conversation between them that sounded too intimate, too personal to be ordinary. At first, she dismissed it as her imagination, but then came a photograph carelessly left behind, one that captured the siblings together in a way that felt too close for comfort. Doubt turned into suspicion, and suspicion grew into a certainty that something was very wrong. The siblings felt the shift almost immediately. The friend's questions became sharper, her eyes more watchful. She asked about their constant closeness, about why they spent so much time together when they were adults with their own lives. The sister tried to brush it off, but her nervousness gave her away. The brother grew defensive, sensing that the walls of secrecy they had built so carefully were beginning to crack. Fear settled into their lives like an unwelcome guest, poisoning every interaction. The brother, who had once been calm and confident, began to unravel. He watched the friend with growing paranoia, convinced that she was going to expose them. Every conversation she had with others felt suspicious, every glance in their direction a possible sign of betrayal. He started monitoring what he said, how he acted, and even where he went, afraid that one mistake would give her more evidence. His sister was no calmer. She grew quieter, more withdrawn, constantly looking over her shoulder, terrified that their entire world would collapse with a single word. The secret that had once bound them together now began to feel like a weapon turned against them. Their love, hidden in the shadows, was no longer just their escape, it was also their prison. They lived each day with the growing realization that someone else now held power over them, someone who could destroy everything if she chose. The fear created tension between them. The brother's paranoia clashed with the sister's anxiety, and for the first time, cracks appeared in their once unshakable loyalty to each other. The friend's presence loomed larger with every passing day. She began avoiding direct confrontation, but her silence was even more frightening. What did she know? Who had she told? Was she gathering evidence or simply waiting for the right moment? The uncertainty gnawed at the siblings, leaving them unable to sleep, unable to focus, consumed by the threat of exposure. What had once been a life of stolen moments and quiet passion had transformed into a nightmare of fear and suspicion. The brother started to consider the unthinkable. In his mind, there was only one way to end the torment, only one way to guarantee silence. The thought crept in slowly at first, a passing idea that he tried to push away. But as the days went on, it returned again and again, stronger each time, until it became something he could no longer ignore. If the friend disappeared, their secret would be safe. If she was gone, the threat would vanish with her. He did not tell his sister at first, but she sensed the darkness growing in him. His eyes grew colder, his words shorter, his actions more calculated. She felt the shift, but was too afraid to ask. When he finally hinted at what he was planning, she froze between terror and loyalty. Part of her wanted to scream, to beg him to stop before it was too late. But another part of her, the part bound by fear of losing everything, stayed silent. In her silence, she gave him permission. The plan was simple, at least in his mind. The friend trusted them, after all. A meeting arranged under the guise of reconciliation, a quiet location where no one else would be, and then end to the threat. He convinced himself it was the only option, the only way to protect the life they had built together. He told himself it was not murder but survival, that he was doing what was necessary to save both of them. The sister, though horrified, allowed herself to believe the same. She did not stop him, and in doing so she became complicit. The night came when the plan was set into motion. The friend, unaware of the danger, agreed to meet. The location was secluded, chosen carefully to ensure privacy. The siblings arrived together, carrying the weight of what was about to happen. The air was heavy with silence, every sound amplified, every movement deliberate. For the brother, there was no turning back. For the sister, each step felt like walking toward a fate she could not escape. When it was over, the friend never returned home. Her disappearance sent shockwaves through the town. A missing person report was filed, and soon her name was on every flyer, her face on every screen. The community gathered in sorrow and confusion, desperate to find answers. The siblings joined in the performance, pretending to be just as concerned as everyone else. They offered sympathy, they joined the searches, they stood among the grieving as though they were innocent. But beneath their calm appearances lay the dark truth of what they had done. At first, they believed they had succeeded. There were no witnesses, no obvious clues, nothing to connect them directly to the crime. They returned to their lives with forced normalcy, convincing themselves that the danger was gone. Yet the weight of what they had done did not lift. The sister was consumed by guilt, haunted by the face of her friend, by the silence of complicity. The brother grew colder, harder, convincing himself that what he had done was necessary, that he had sacrificed one life to save two. But secrets like theirs never stayed hidden for long. The investigation pressed forward, detectives digging deeper into the friend's last known movements. Questions began to circle back to the siblings who were seen with her before she vanished. Their carefully crafted stories were examined, their alibis tested, their lies picked apart. The tension that had once come from hiding their relationship now doubled under the weight of hiding a crime. Their double life was becoming impossible to maintain, and though they could not admit it to each other, both knew that the truth was moving closer. The friend who had threatened to expose them was gone, but in her absence she left behind the one thing they feared most: suspicion. The murder had been carried out in silence, but the silence that followed was far louder than either sibling could have imagined. When the friend never came home that night, her absence was immediately noticed. She had been dependable, someone who never strayed far without telling others where she was going. Her family grew frantic within hours, calling her phone again and again, leaving messages that were never returned. By morning, the police were involved, and the search began in earnest. Flyers with her face appeared on street corners, social media filled with pleas for information, and neighbors organized groups to comb through parks, abandoned lots, and wooded trails. The siblings inserted themselves into the search with forced determination. The brother offered his help, volunteering to check areas no one else wanted to go. The sister stood among the grieving, comforting her friend's family while pretending not to feel the icy weight of guilt pressing against her chest. They moved carefully, mimicking the behaviors of others, mirroring grief and shock so convincingly that no one thought to question them. Their performance was flawless, but their minds were restless. The brother believed he had done what was necessary. He convinced himself that eliminating the threat had been an act of protection, that their secret would have destroyed them if it had come out. Yet beneath his hardened exterior, paranoia grew sharper by the day. He replayed the night in his mind endlessly, scanning every detail for mistakes. Had he left something behind? Had anyone seen them together? Did the friend tell anyone her suspicions before she vanished? These questions haunted him like shadows that never left, eating away at the certainty he had tried to build. The sister's torment was different. Where he hardened, she crumbled. She could not escape the image of her friend's face, could not shake the sound of silence in that secluded place when it was all over. Her guilt spread like poison, seeping into every part of her life. She withdrew from others, speaking less, avoiding gatherings, struggling to maintain the mask that was slipping more with each passing day. She began to see her friend everywhere, in strangers on the street, in reflections, in dreams that woke her in the middle of the night, trembling with dread. The police investigation moved steadily, gathering information piece by piece. Detectives interviewed everyone close to the missing woman, compiling a list of names, timelines, and inconsistencies. When they came to the siblings, they found nothing outwardly suspicious. The brother spoke with calm precision, answering questions directly, offering sympathy for the family. The sister followed suit, though her nervousness was noted. Still, there was no hard evidence to point toward them. For the moment, they seemed safe. But safety was an illusion. Technology began to work against them. Cell phone records were pulled, tracking the movements of everyone who had last spoken to the victim. Surveillance footage from nearby stores and traffic cameras was reviewed, showing glimpses of cars, silhouettes, and timestamps. Slowly, the invisible net began to tighten. A single piece of footage showed the brother's car near the area where the friend was last believed to have been. Though not conclusive, it raised questions. Detectives noticed patterns as well. The siblings' closeness, which had always seemed peculiar to some, now drew sharper attention. Why were they always together? Why did neither of them have significant others? Why did their stories, while consistent, seem too rehearsed? Small cracks began to form in the facade they had constructed. Neighbors who once praised their bond now looked back on moments they had overlooked. Friends recalled instances that had seemed strange but not alarming at the time. The investigation planted seeds of doubt in the community, and soon whispers began to circulate. The pressure on the siblings intensified. The brother became restless, pacing at night, checking and rechecking details, watching for signs that the police were closing in. He grew short-tempered, snapping at his sister for showing fear, urging her to stay calm and quiet. The sister, however, could not contain the weight of guilt. Her silence became noticeable, her anxiety visible to anyone who paid close attention. She avoided eye contact, stumbled over answers, and struggled to hold herself together. The very fear that bound her to her brother now threatened to betray them both. Meanwhile, the police continued to dig deeper. Forensic teams scoured the last known locations of the missing woman, searching for even the smallest trace. Soil samples, fibers, tire marks, every detail was documented. Slowly, a picture began to emerge, and while it was incomplete, it pointed toward foul play rather than disappearance. The missing woman was no runaway. She had been taken, and the last people to see her alive were beginning to stand out in the timeline. The siblings clung to each other in their private world, convinced that only together could they survive. Yet the very bond that had driven them into secrecy was also tearing them apart. The brother's paranoia clashed with the sister's crumbling resolve, and arguments became more frequent. Each accused the other of weakness, of risking exposure. The sister began to wonder if confessing would be better than living under the crushing weight of guilt, but fear of losing everything kept her silent. The breaking point came when detectives returned with more pointed questions. They asked about the brother's car, about why it had been near the location that night. They asked the sister about her last conversation with her friend, pressing her when her answers grew shaky. The calm mask they had worn began to slip, and the detectives saw it. What had once seemed like two cooperative individuals now looked more like two people hiding something. Rumors spread quickly. The missing woman's family began to hear whispers that the siblings were involved. Friends exchanged theories in hushed tones, their suspicions growing stronger. The community that had once admired the siblings now eyed them with unease. Every move they made was watched, every word analyzed, every expression questioned. Their double life was unraveling, thread by thread, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The brother doubled down, insisting that they stay the course, that silence and denial were their only weapons. The sister, however, felt herself slipping closer to collapse. She had become a prisoner not only of their secret love but also of their shared crime. Nights were sleepless, days unbearable. She replayed every moment in her mind, haunted by the choices that had led them here. The investigation had not yet reached its conclusion, but the noose was tightening. The siblings could feel it in every knock at the door, every phone call, every glance from neighbors who no longer trusted them. What had once been a forbidden romance hidden in shadows was now something far darker, a secret soaked in blood, a crime that had transformed their lives into a nightmare. The fear of exposure that had once kept them bound together was now the very thing that threatened to tear them apart. And though they tried to convince themselves otherwise, deep down both of them knew the truth. The crime was not behind them. It was only beginning to unfold, and soon the weight of it would crush everything they had tried so desperately to protect. The trial began under a storm of attention that no one could have predicted. The courtroom was filled with journalists, neighbors, and curious strangers, all eager to hear every detail of the twisted case. The judge maintained a stern presence, aware of how unusual and shocking the crime was. Prosecutors painted a picture of obsession, jealousy, and betrayal, arguing that the affair between brother and sister had become a dark spiral that ended in cold-blooded murder. The evidence was laid out piece by piece, from the bloody weapon found in the garden to the phone records that revealed countless late-night messages between the two siblings. The jury was shown photographs of the crime scene that were too disturbing for some to look at. The defense tried to argue that it was an accident, claiming that the violence erupted in a heated moment and was never planned. They tried to lean on the forbidden nature of the relationship as a way to explain the emotional instability that surrounded the crime. But each attempt to soften the act was met with strong counterarguments and unshakable evidence. Witnesses were called to testify, including friends who had suspected something strange between the siblings long before the murder. Some neighbors admitted to hearing late-night arguments, while others confessed they had seen signs of affection that seemed inappropriate. The jury began to see a pattern of secrecy, hidden desires, and escalating tension that had finally snapped in the worst way possible. The most powerful testimony came from a forensic expert who explained how the wounds on the victim were not random or accidental. The placement of each strike, the depth of the cuts, and the angle of the blows showed intent rather than panic. It painted a picture of rage rather than defense. Every detail pointed toward murder with purpose, not a sudden mistake. The siblings' parents were brought into the courtroom, their faces pale and heavy with grief. They had already lost one child to violence and now faced the reality that the other might spend life behind bars. Their sorrow was felt by everyone in the room, but it could not change the facts of the case. Their testimonies revealed how they had been blind to the signs, choosing not to believe rumors until it was too late. They admitted they had dismissed warnings from relatives and neighbors, hoping it was all harmless speculation. The jury listened closely as the defense argued again, trying to shift blame toward circumstances and emotional fragility. They claimed that years of repression and the taboo of the relationship had created unbearable pressure. But even as they spoke, the evidence sat heavily in the courtroom, undeniable and unshakable. The prosecution reminded the jury that choice was at the heart of the case. The sibling had chosen secrecy, chosen obsession, and ultimately chosen violence. After weeks of testimony and endless speculation, the jury retreated to deliberate. The atmosphere in the courtroom during their absence was tense, with everyone waiting for the final outcome. Hours passed slowly, and when the jury finally returned, all eyes turned toward them. The verdict was delivered in silence that seemed to stretch endlessly. Guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom, leaving the convicted siblings staring blankly ahead, as if the weight of reality had finally pressed down too heavily to bear. The sentence that followed ensured decades behind prison walls with little hope of freedom. The story became a nationwide obsession, covered in headlines and dissected in documentaries. People debated whether it was love, madness, or both that had driven the siblings to destruction. The case was remembered not only for its shocking details, but for the questions it raised about secrecy, obsession, and the dangerous paths people can walk when boundaries are broken. In the end, the house where it all happened was abandoned, left to decay as an eerie reminder of what unfolded there. Neighbors avoided walking past it at night, and children whispered stories about ghosts lingering inside. The family fractured, each member carrying scars that would never fully heal. The trial ended, the sentence was given, and the world moved on, but the echoes of what had happened between brother and sister lingered. It was a story that revealed how far obsession could push a person, how dangerous hidden relationships could become, and how tragedy could grow silently inside the walls of an ordinary home. What remained was a cautionary tale that would never be forgotten, a chilling reminder of the thin line between love and destruction, and how crossing that line can lead to an ending drenched in blood and sorrow.